It has been a long time since there's been this much action. One sad note in all this, of course, is the absence of one name. Our job is to choose whom we think can be the most effective. It's an interesting and exciting race, and all we have to do is vote. So let's do it, and let's make it a big one. We pray that is so. This is Bob Harrington.
Washington moves fast, policy shift overnight, and yet here in our corner of Vermont, the real impact often comes at the speed of town meetings and Main Street conversations. Politics aren't just about headlines and sound bites. It's about people, communities, and the choices that shape our lives. They say all politics is local, but in a nation this divided, what does that actually mean? We're not here for spin. We're here for clarity, for straight answers, for the kind of talk you'd expect over a cup of coffee at the local diner, not in the halls of Congress. This is Matt Harrington, and this is the Chamber Telecast. Welcome back to the Chamber Telecast, where we unpack the policies shaping Vermont's economic future with our partners over at CAT TV. I'm your host, Matt Harrington. This spring kicked off with a flurry of legislative activity and a clear sign that our Commonwealth is navigating some pretty major crossroads. From education funding and property tax reform to housing, workforce development, and clean energy initiatives, Montpelier was abuzz all session long. At the helm of Vermont's business advocacy is Amy Spear, president of the Vermont Chamber of Commerce. Amy has been a constant voice urging collaboration in the State House, even as the pressure mounted. Her leadership helped rally businesses and communities to help mold impactful policies this year. We'll hear from her take on successes, maybe some lingering challenges that she foresees, and what's next for Vermont. Amy, I wanted to welcome you to the Chamber Telecast. Welcome.
Thanks for having me today. Great to be here and to see you.
Yeah, you too. So Amy and I are good old friends here. We've been in the chamber world now, Amy, 10 years plus. So it's scared, at least in the Vermont scene. So I really appreciate you hopping on. I know you're running around somewhat literally today, in your background, and yet you carved out some time for us, and I appreciate that. So we're going to kick it off real quick. What did you have for breakfast this morning, if you had any breakfast this morning, and what do you think it says about you?
Well, I would say it wasn't a very exciting breakfast because, as you said, it was a day that I was running around. So I had a maple latte that I made at home and a protein bar because I then quite literally got on the road for the day, starting with meetings with our members, followed by some time at the State House to attend a bill signing ceremony that included military retiree pension exemption. So busy day running around, and now we're in Barrie at the Barrie Auditorium for the Vermont State Finals of the Civics Bee.
Yes, and we're going to talk about a lot of those items you just mentioned. What do you think the breakfast says about you again?
I think it says that I was running around a lot today. I think of my time as a track athlete. So maybe I'm in a bit of a sprint workout today, but something I love doing. Great.
Well, we want to dive right into the session. It was a busy session by any standards, and obviously, as the world and the nation and the country get more complicated, so goes Vermont as well. In 2025 session, you saw several headline moves: renewed focus on property tax relief, updated education finance bills, incentives for clean energy, support for tourism and workforce development. From the Vermont Chamber's perspective, what were some of the most significant wins that you see, and where do you still see some room for improvement?
I guess I would say one thing was entering the session in a very different stage than we were in prior years. There was a big shift after the November elections where we saw there's no more Democratic supermajority in the House or the Senate.
And this is the Vermont House and Senate, just to clarify for people, we saw a shift not only nationally, but specifically right here in Vermont.
Yeah, absolutely. The biggest shift, I believe, in 25 years in the Vermont legislature. So we were working in a very different dynamic than we had been in recent memory, and going in a little magic 8 ball. Were we going to get a lot done because people were going to be at the table compromising, or were key initiatives going to be stalled out because compromising is would have been a learned experience. So one thing that was interesting is we saw a little bit of both. When we look at the Chamber's legislative agenda for the year, as the session concluded, and we really reflected on, I think you alluded to this earlier, really hard fought, meaningful progress for the business community and the greater economy. So we were guided going into the session by a clear focus on affordability through critical reform, incremental progress towards aspirational goals, and innovative solutions for people and places. So we're pleased that the legislature touched on each of these things this year, looking at the people and places dynamic. Hopefully you see that as a key common thing and a theme of a lot of things that we're doing at the Chamber, because it's grounded in the Vermont Economic Action Plan that was released by the Vermont Futures Project. So a lot of our work, if you're thinking about it, it's in the P world. So the planning all the way to policy, where the planning comes out of the Vermont Futures Project, data-driven, informed, and then with the policy side comes from the Chamber's advocacy team in the State House. So from advancing smart growth in our communities to workforce development to beginning to address the healthcare issues in our state. Efforts remained grounded in collaboration, as I mentioned earlier, informed by the needs of the Vermont business community. So, we say at the heart of it, though, the gains that we saw in this legislative session were really made possible because Vermont Chamber members and those in the local communities that engaged with their local chambers were engaged, vocal, and resolute. And it really made a difference in the legislature.
Yeah, so we both can kind of commiserate or understand when your members speak up and collectively progress gets made. I know we're going to jump into some more of this, but anything on right off the bat that you're like, but there's still some room for improvement here? Anything that comes to mind?
Yeah, for sure. I think the legislative session delivered a mix of progress, pause, and left some uncertainty for things to come for Vermont employers. So as I mentioned, there were lawmakers advanced proposals to support workforce development, housing, infrastructure. But then there was this continued pattern of high spending, new mandates, and regulatory burdens. So high spending, the state budget continues to grow. New mandates or regulatory burdens. There's new unpaid leave laws that are going to be going into effect. So what happened this year or didn't happen this year is going to continue to shape Vermont's business climate for the years to come, including data privacy, which is something that is staying on the wall until next year.
Yeah. Okay. So kind of along those lines around education and workforce, the Chamber did help shape some of the new education finance bill, aiming to really for some tax stabilization. How do you assess its potential with both students on one hand, but also local employers struggling with workforce shortages? How did that all come about, and what should we take note this summer?
Yeah, I would say that when we're looking at the education delivery and finance reform bill that was ultimately passed, there's a lot to unpack there, both on the education delivery side and on the finance side. I'll focus most on the finance side of things because there's a lot to come still on the delivery. There's a lot of work that's going to be done over the summer, whether it's by summer committee or administrative actions. So there's a lot to be done still, and it leaves a little bit more to come. But one thing that we spent a lot of time on were the tax classifications in the bill. So one might think tax classifications in an education bill. Why? That's because our education system is funded through our property taxes. So there are currently two categories in our state. We have homestead and non-homestead. So homestead, you think of if you live there and you own the home, it's your homestead. Non-homestead includes everything else from apartments to businesses to manufacturing facilities to your second homes to your deer camps. There was an effort to break out the non-homestead categories into multiple categories, which included a category specific for businesses. And again, this goes back to it was incredible to see the business community rally, legislators listen, and the governor go to bat for the business community to say, this is a step too far. Let's make sure that we're really focusing on the predictable tax system that's meaningful, that'll help contain costs and make our economy stronger. But I think, again, beyond the tax side of things, what still is yet to come is the meaningful cost containment measures. Because if we don't really contain our costs within the education system, if we're not truly addressing the root causes, which is still to be seen, there's a lot of work to be done still, we do run the risk of repeating the cycle of tax volatility that we're in right now.
Yeah, and my guess, I don't know if you said it as pointed, but the guess is that the taxes would have gone up for businesses in particular to help support some of the education. We have seen that time and time again, especially in a very social, sensitive state like Vermont, that we really do have some concerns: childcare, schooling, even housing, and oftentimes, unfortunately, the de facto where are we going to get all the money? It goes to businesses. So I think the punchline here is a very much appreciative Vermont Chamber, along with the very vocal outcry by businesses to say, "Oh, that's not too fair. Wait a minute, wait a minute." So is that did I assume?
Yeah. I mean, history has a way of repeating itself, and so we do try to be students of history and, acutely aware of what's in policy proposals. And, last year, the House, so not this past year, but the year before that, in the previous biennium, the House passed $150 million in new taxes. Those were ultimately defeated by the Senate. But, we saw that as a harbinger of what could be to come for businesses, because regardless of the reform that happens from an education delivery standpoint, if there's not a way for us to contain costs or achieve efficiencies, we are going to still have those affordability issues, which is not what anybody wants in the outcome here. So we want a strong education delivery system, really solid delivery for our students, but then we also want to make sure it's affordable, sustainable, and predictable.
Yeah. Okay, let's hop over to housing. I mentioned kind of the four horsemen of Vermont, childcare, education, housing, workforce somewhere in the middle of that, probably some AI. But with housing and affordability, both legislative proposals and the governor's housing agenda, with both of those, what's the chamber's view on whether current measures are sufficient to tackle affordability, lower A, as well as big A, as well as workforce housing in Vermont small communities? Is it enough? Should we go further? Or what was your experience this past session with all that went on during housing?
Yeah, I would say housing, the key phrase, going back to one of our pillars that we went into the session with was the session really brought incremental progress, not necessarily the bold action that we need. There were some really good things that did happen in the housing space. There was $15 million that was allocated for middle income housing, continued funding for revolving loan tools. Those are huge wins for our state. However, I think it's a big however there. The scale of Vermont's housing crisis demands that we need to triple our current construction rates in our state. So the chamber is going to continue to call for smart growth policies, streamlined permitting, new infrastructure investments to unlock that housing capacity across the state. And I guess the key program that I do want to highlight that did pass this year was Vermont's CHIP program. And that's, if you want to think of it, it's like a mini TIF, which is a tax increment financing district. That's aimed to help towns fund infrastructure for housing without raising taxes. So that was passed as part of the housing bill, which was 479. And what's key there, so it's the Community Housing Infrastructure Program, CHIP. You might have seen it in the news recently, but one of the key things there is that we need to address our state's escalating housing crisis, particularly in our rural regions where affordability and infrastructure deficits do continue to hinder growth. And this CHIP program is a really important tool for the rural communities to have in their tool belt to accelerate their housing development. So there's more to come through rulemaking on that, but that's a really exciting program that passed. Megan Sullivan, who's our Vice President of Government Affairs, has been working to pass that program for about 6 years now, starting during her tenure when she was working for the Agency of Commerce and Community Development, now on the team at the Vermont Chamber. So it was a long haul, so we're very happy to see that over the finish line.
So when Megan watches this, a big congratulations to Megan. Decade in the making. When I think of CHIP, and I've met with some of our members up in the North Shire and South Shire, and met with our senators, and we've had a couple discussions about it. I always think of it as the last mile with everything else. We've got that last mile for Wi-Fi, and a lot of that's coming to fruition over the last couple of years. But oftentimes when people want to develop out in rural settings, even further outside the townships, right? So into rural places like Shaftesbury or Reedsboro or wherever, it's hard to get that sewer, that road, those basic infrastructure needs there. What if something like the CHIP could bring some of that through some fancy financing, not on the back of the builder, but on other ways to do that, and so that when the builder does want to go build out in Shaftesbury or wherever they happen to do, that's already there. And I've talked to plenty of builders, of housing agents and things like that. That is crucial to get us across some type of finish line of even getting into the game of developing more housing, is to encourage the developers by providing that last mile, if you will, of the utilities. Okay. I do want to talk.
Sounds like a lot of excitement, though, Matt, on your end of things. So I'm glad to hear, the walls of the State House can be very thick and things are trickling out, being signed into law. And it's exciting to hear, what's happening in your local jurisdiction and how your communities are looking forward to what CHIP can bring and the difference it can make in your infrastructure and housing.
Yeah, we were both up in Manchester at one point and Bennington, and they're just such different conversations that go on through both of those. But we were joined by the housing commissioner and his deputy. But in Bennington specifically, a lot of excitement there, and beat our own chest a little bit. But Bennington is thirsty to get more housing. In fact, we've done a lot of things in the last 5 to 7 years. So something like CHIP just adds more gasoline to the fire. And I think it was the deputy commissioner who did say, look, Bennington is a shining light here of what could be done even at the most stressful points. Now that we can give you some more access, some more policy, some more funding, we're happy to do that. Obviously, many investments going on in Bennington and throughout, even up into Manchester. I do want to shift over to this concept of business-friendly fiscal kind of framework. I think you and I always have to toe that line between chambers are ... fill it in, red, Republican, conservative, Trumpian, whatever. And we're not, for one. There's no hierarchy. We're not chapters of any bigger thing. However, I think you and I both approach the legislative, the policymaking, even some of the frameworks that there needs to be kind of this business-friendly fiscal framework. So can you just talk to that? I think especially for the Vermont Chamber, that just sometimes a breath of fresh air for some of us here who go, man, there's a lot of social issues. We want to take care of a lot of people, but it can't always be on the back of businesses. So talk to us a little bit about Vermont Chamber's business-friendly fiscal framework.
Yeah, I mean, all great alliterations and titles there, Matt. So I have to give you kudos on that. So I will say grounded in everything is listening to our members and data informed. And so, paired with the listening to our members, we did issue a business climate survey in advance of this legislative session to say, it was basically, let's take your temperature. How are you feeling about everything from taxation to childcare to healthcare to just the general business climate in our state? And the numbers were pretty stark when you looked at them. And it was certainly a call for reform, a call for affordability. And we saw that in the outcome of the elections when we asked businesses, how would you rate Vermont's business climate on a scale of 1 to 5? 1 being the worst, 5 being the best. We were squarely at a 2.53, I believe, was the final number that came in there. So not great. I was just at the bill signing for the military retiree pension exemption and other tax credits that passed this year. And Vermont ranks near the bottom of the barrel for a state for veterans, for military retirees to go to. And that would be a critical part of our workforce. So when we're looking at it, it's from a huge lens. And when we asked our businesses, do you feel like state investments are balanced with the outcomes? And the answer was no. Over 90% of businesses said that we're out of balance. with our investments and our outcomes, the cost of doing business is just mounting. And when we look at our state budget, spending is up $3 billion over 5 years. So we've gone from about a $6 billion budget to a $9 billion budget. So really sounding the alarm as we look ahead, as we face a lot of federal uncertainty, that affordability, a strong economy, and supporting the businesses that are the backbones of our communities, that really needs to be guiding our decisions as we go through things. Because you look at all of our local communities, whether it's rural or a more urban setting, businesses are the foundation of our economic resilience, and we need to make sure they're supported not only from a fiscal perspective on affordability, but also from a regulatory burden perspective.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's follow that thread. And part of this show and the effort of this show, the Chamber Telecast, the reason we started it back again, we had something similar during the pandemic and COVID. And I know our team at the Chamber, as well as our local access television, Cat TV, felt like it was just very important to keep communication up during such a stressful time. We opened it back up again. No surprise to federal government and a federal administration that, if nothing else, is different than what we're often used to. I think there are some concerns. And so if nothing else, we wanted to open up those lines of communication. We've had plenty of guests on here just kind of giving us different various viewpoints. But I would like to hear from you, Amy, and kind of the Vermont Chamber. Like I said, sometimes we get lumped into one party or the other. But I would love to hear, how do you take the national policies that are coming out and priorities? You're so much in the thick of that, you and your team. How are you finding that they're actually landing here in Vermont? How protected are we? I mean, we've done interviews where we've talked everything from immigration and ICE and some real concern there, immediate concern, all the way to grant funding that is going to evaporate and die off. So how are you fielding that at kind of this cross section of, we believe in business friendly policy, we believe in kind of conservative fiscal management, and at the same time, perhaps this national administration is just a little bit different than even that. So where are you finding the crossroads? Where are you finding places to collaborate and or kind of ease any of your members' concerns?
Yeah, I mean, I think as a bipartisan organization, we're always, looking at what's best for the economy and what's best for businesses. That's our true north, right? Our mission is to advance the Vermont economy. We do that through advocacy and community and resources. And right now, I'm going to use an analogy that NBT Bank's chief economist uses with hard and soft ice cream. So if you look at it, soft ice cream are the headlines that you see every single day, which are jarring and puts your head on a swivel at all times. And then there is the hard ice cream, which is what's hard and true, what's actually coming down the pike and what's facing our current economy, whether it's nonprofits, the business sector, loss of grants, loss of government contracts. At the end of the day, we know if we even just start looking at the hard data in our state, there's a lot of uncertainty right now, whether there's some grants that are paused and are started again or that are removed permanently that are impacting businesses. The other thing to note here is Vermont receives an outsized amount of federal funding for our state budget, whether it's for Department of Labor or transportation. There's a lot of money that flows into our state from the federal government, more than some other states. And so when there are fiscal impacts that are coming from the federal government, we have an outsized impact here in our state. So there's a chance that depending on what ultimately happens with federal funding and coming down to the states, that we might have to redo our state budget at some point in time, because we just can't be fiscally responsible if we're not getting if we have a $200 million loss, for example, in healthcare support that's coming to our state. So I think my favorite phrase right now is that it's hard to see around the corner, because there really is a lack of clarity, because there's headlines that you're always paying attention to, and then there's what's happening. So we're getting prepared for lean times in our state, which is really why cost containment and affordability at the state level are so critically important. We're at a time where we're probably going to have to be tightening our belt as a state, and leading with affordability is going to be very important to make sure that we balance all of the needs of our economy.
Yeah. And I think that regardless of who's in office at the White House, that even the pandemic funding, the Build Back Better, all those things are sunsetting too. So in a way, We were very frothy in our 2024 5 years, even before then, because of the outsized amount of federal funding. And so, in general, we need to be saying, "Hey, it's time to go on a diet." We've had all the Thanksgiving dinner we can take. So I appreciate that. Let's shift gears to something maybe more positive, more
I
optimistic.
love that.
Okay. You and your team are working on a national civic bee. You just recently launched this to foster civic awareness, which we much appreciate. Talk to us a little bit about what the National Civic Bee is and why focusing on youth engagement, and can maybe tie a little bit to your legislative goals as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So as I mentioned earlier, I'm in Barrie right now. We're getting ready for this evening's Vermont State Finals. We have 6 students coming from the Northeast Kingdom and 2 students that are coming from Rutland County. But I would say something that is important is that the National Civics Bee is more than just a contest. It is a pipeline. So we see engaging youth in civic life not only builds the next generation of problem solvers and voters and entrepreneurs, as policy decisions grow more complex, fostering civic literacy to ensure future Vermonters can meaningfully participate in shaping the state's economic and legislative future. It's so important, starting early, getting them engaged and interested. And it's really been incredible to see ideas and things that students are putting out there, everything from how to bring efficiencies to how to think a little bit bigger. But I won't spoil the outcomes of those essays as we go through those questions. But, we see that, engaging in something like the National Civics Bee is something that's critically important because it's important for our state's future. It's important for our economy's future. And it's, also exciting to see young minds that are in middle school wanting to be civically engaged. And one Vermonter will be heading down to Washington, D.C. to the national finals.
Great. I wonder how many of us would all pass a civic bee at this point in our lives. And that's kind of scary to think about. As we wrap up today, Amy, we so appreciate you taking some time out. We know you've got a whole civic bee ahead of you. The legislative biennium is over, but the work isn't done. First, explain to us what a biennium is. So a lot of us people on the streets, we need to understand how this legislature actually operates. So explain the biennium, but really what we want to know is what are the chamber's top priorities as we pivot towards the next cycle? Why should Vermonters watch for next in the next session? But explain the biennium to us for a second.
Yes. So the Vermont legislature operates in 2-year cycles. So we are in the first year of the 2-year cycle, or I should say the first year of the 2-year cycle just wrapped up. And then in January of 2026, hard to believe we're in 25 right now, but in January of 2026, the legislature will return to the State House for the second year of the biennium. So some interesting things to point out is there might be a bill that was introduced this year that didn't get any committee time that can, as they say, come off the wall in the next session and be taken up by the committee. So any bills that are introduced throughout the biennium can be taken up. So it's a 2-year process. So maybe a marathon versus a sprint, like I did this morning for my my breakfast analogy, but a 2-year cycle. So what we're expecting next year will be really interesting, especially as we will have another cycle, another election cycle coming up for next November. So the 2025 session really showed us what's possible when Vermont businesses are heard. We saw positive outcomes with CHIP, with tax classifications, with funding for Advance Vermont to support workforce development, to ensure that our state's attorneys received their full funding so that public safety efforts can continue. And as we look into 2026, our focus remains on building a more affordable Vermont through data-informed policy, looking at our infrastructure readiness and growing an inclusive workforce. So we'll also continue pushing for education cost containment, as I mentioned earlier. The full picture of 454 isn't there yet. There's a lot of work that has to be done. Continuing to look at those rural revitalization tools. So what's next after CHIP, for example? And again, looking at a tax code that does encourage, not punish growth. And we're inviting, really, because your businesses' voices, your members' voices truly make a difference when your legislators hear from you. So we're encouraging people to be involved and diligent and follow what's going on.
Great. We appreciate all of that, Amy, and we should give a shout out. The Southwestern Vermont Chamber and the Vermont Chamber have a long history of great collaboration. But one of the best collaborations we have is, especially during the session, we publish what we call Monday Matters legislative briefing. A lot of that work comes from your team, and so if that's something that you're interested in, please reach out to us. If you're watching this and you're like, I'd love to learn more about these business-friendly policies or get to know Amy and her team, we produce that every Monday in the session, and then especially throughout the summer as we need to update people. But that's called Monday Matters, and that's our legislative briefing in partnership with the Vermont Chamber. Finally, Amy, let us know where our audience can learn more about you, about the initiatives you're doing, and perhaps most importantly, if they do want to get involved, if they do want to also have a membership with the Vermont Chamber, they can. Where do they learn more?
Yeah. So you can visit vtchamber.com, and that will give you everything you need to know, whether it's about our events, our government affairs work, or how to sign up as a member.
Great. Amy, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Matt.
As the dust settles on the 2025 legislative session, the contours of Vermont future have come perhaps into a little bit sharper focus. From the halls of Montpelier to the storefronts on Main Street, decisions made this year carry real weight for businesses, families, and communities. Amy Spear and the Vermont Chamber have steered with great precision already, pushing for smart investment in education, balanced tax policy, house affordability, and rural economic development. They framed a vision of Vermont where the public and private sectors align for collective prosperity. At a time when national rhetoric often pulls us towards extremes one way or the other, it's easy to forget how vital it is to have organizations rooted in that balance, like chambers of commerce. Business friendly doesn't mean favoring one group over another. It means fostering an environment where entrepreneurs, employers, and employees all have the tools to grow and thrive. The Chamber is not just an advocate for industry, it's a steward for economic resilience. When done well, pro-business leadership becomes pro-community leadership. It means jobs created, towns revitalized, nonprofit and social causes supported, and a Vermont that's not just surviving, but building towards something greater. Special thanks to the Vermont Chamber and Amy, our team over at Catamount Access Television, and our producer, Mike Cutler. Keep staying curious, stay engaged, and stay involved. I'm Matt Harrington, and this is the Chamber Telecast.